So, today we're diving into something huge that's unfolding in Geneva, a new round of high-stakes peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. After years of brutal war, delegations are meeting again, and everyone is wondering, could this finally be a breakthrough? And you have to remember, this is a conflict that has completely reshaped security in Europe. It's cost tens of thousands of lives, forced millions of people to flee their homes, and just leveled entire Ukrainian cities. It's against that really tragic backdrop that this new effort is happening, which makes the outcome just so incredibly important for the whole region. The timing on this is, well, it's pretty significant. These talks are kicking off just days before the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion back on February 24th, 2022. That fact alone just adds this whole other layer of symbolic weight and, frankly, urgency to what's happening. All right, so let's get into what's actually going on in Geneva. This isn't the first time they've tried to talk peace, not by a long shot, but the situation on the ground and the political pressures have shifted a lot. So just for a quick recap to bring everyone up to speed, the full-scale invasion started back in February 2022. More recently, there were talks earlier this year in Abu Dhabi, but those just fizzled out. They didn't lead to any kind of breakthrough. And that brings us right here to these really pivotal negotiations that have just started in Geneva. Now, one really important detail. The Kremlin has confirmed that these talks are happening completely behind closed doors. We're talking no press, no cameras, no photo ops. That level of secrecy usually tells you one thing. The negotiations are extremely sensitive, and maybe, just maybe, both sides are taking this more seriously than they have before. Okay, so who's actually in the room, and what are the things they absolutely will not budge on? This right here is the real heart of the matter. On the Russian side, the delegation's being led by Vladimir Medinsky, who's a key aide to President Putin. He's joined by their military intelligence chief, Igor Kostukov, which tells you there's a heavy security focus. For Ukraine, their team is led by Rustem Umerov, the head of their security council, along with other top officials. So these are definitely the A-teams, really high-level players from both sides. And this is where you see the fundamental clash. Russia is demanding that Ukraine hand over the rest of the eastern Donetsk region and pull its troops out of key areas. Ukraine's position? It's a hard no. Absolutely no territorial concessions. What they want instead are solid security guarantees from the West, basically promises from other countries to help defend them if they're ever attacked again. And just to give you a sense of the scale of Russia's demands, they currently occupy about 1/5 of Ukraine's territory. That includes Crimea and parts of the Donbass that were taken even before the 2022 invasion. We're talking about a massive, massive amount of land here. Now, there's another major player here, one that's putting a ton of pressure on these talks, even though they're not officially at the negotiating table. And that, of course, is the United States. I mean, listen to this direct quote from President Trump. He was talking to reporters on Air Force One, and he said, Ukraine better come to the table fast. He called the talks big, and a public statement like that is pretty much seen as a direct push on Kyiv to cut a deal, and soon. And how did Ukraine react? Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has said publicly that his country is facing, in his words, the greatest pressure from Washington to make concessions. You can see how this outside pressure just adds this whole other complicated dynamic for the Ukrainian negotiators. And this isn't just talk from Washington either. The Trump administration sent envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, to Geneva. Having them there on the ground just shows how seriously the White House is invested in what happens with these talks. So you've got these completely opposite demands, and you've got all this major external pressure. What are the real chances for a breakthrough? Let's kind of look at the hopes versus the hurdles. Well, according to one Moscow-based political scientist, Vladimir Sotnikov, there might be a little bit of room for optimism. He thinks Russia's intentions are actually serious this time, and it's driven by something pretty simple. Ordinary people in Russia are just tired of the war. That kind of fatigue at home could be a really powerful reason for the Kremlin to find a way out. But even if they could somehow solve the land issue, huge sticking points are still on the table. We're talking about incredibly complex problems, like who's going to control the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the biggest in Europe, and what role, if any, Western troops might have in a post-war Ukraine. These are enormous obstacles for any kind of lasting peace deal. So where does this all leave us? With these talks happening in secret, the world is pretty much just holding its breath, watching and waiting to see what comes out of that room. And let's be clear, the stakes here could not be higher. The result of these talks is probably going to decide the next chapter of what has become Europe's deadliest conflict since the Second World War. The future path for the entire continent is kind of hanging in the balance. And so, that leaves us with the one single defining question. After 4 years of brutal fighting, with all this intense international pressure building, will diplomacy finally win out, or are the two sides just too far apart, meaning this conflict is destined to drag on? The world is waiting for an answer.